Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your regular retrospective on Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joe, I'm one of your hosts, and with me as always is your other xylophonic host.
Brian, hi, how's it going?
Not too bad, how are you?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, fine, I'm fine.
I like your cap. Are we in cap weather now?
We're in cap weather now.
Yeah, I think the changing of the seasons are upon us, and as with every year I'm always surprised by how little I can handle even the slightest increase in heat.
I also have been finding the heat difficult, especially at night. I mean, like sleeping when it's warm in your bedroom is like it's fair.
It's hell. Yeah. I wonder how warm it is where our listeners are around
probably,
the world.
Probably warmer than we've been like, oh god, it's so warm. It was 20 degrees here the other day, and we were like, geez, we're melting.
Yeah.
So
we're very sensitive babies, really.
Yep.
And so we are here, as always, to talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So this week we're going to be looking at our fourth last episode in our ranking of all Buffy episodes, back to front. Mm-hmm. So this week we'll be going from episode in our ranking, the 31st best episode to the 22nd most best episode.
Absolutely. And before we do that, should we do some bronze bantering? Would that be
absolutely.
Fun?
So I have a weird week, or weird week or so in terms of media, because we haven't watched as much as what we would regularly watch, but I've also constructed an insane playlist of back catalogue stuff that like I've never finished that I've been watching through. So like on there I have like you know the way that they had to make a Fantastic Four movie in 1994, or else they would lose the license to make a movie with it. There's a number of films, Marvel related films, that they produce like terrible movies to keep the licensing. So I have all that.
Is that how the Captain America one happened?
Yeah, that kind of thing. So I have all
this
that.
This is Captain America 92 featuring Matt Salinger, JD Salinger's son.
Yes,
Captain America.
It's exactly the same thing. Yes, I have all that on a playlist. Watching old cast off Star Trek stuff, weird videos and stuff. So but we haven't actually necessarily had a lot of time to watch regular scheduled content. But
you finished Star Wars Rebels, right?
Star Wars Rebels. I watched all Star Wars Bad Batch. I finished that last night. It's only 16 episodes.
Oh, okay.
So watched that last night. Oh, perfectly enjoyable. Star Wars continues to make almost no sense as a storytelling like universe, and it's like consistently pro-slavery, but is people like watching a Star Wars. I think with this I continue to think of myself, I wouldn't say I'm a Star Wars fan, and yet I've consumed almost every Star Wars thing that's ever been created, so I don't know what that says about me. But maybe the most significant thing that we get to watch this week was the season 5 and the final season of Better Things.
Pamela Adlon's masterpiece of television, like a genuine dramedy in the sense that life is both funny and dramatic and sad. It's if anyone remembers the Louis C.K. show Louis, which obviously we've all stricken from memories because Louis C.K. is a gross human. This is basically it's a very similar structure, and he helped create it with Pamela Adlon, Pamela Adlon is a very famous voice actor and just general actor. She did most famously Bobby from King of the Hill. I think was her kind of biggest voice role, but you'd recognize her voice anywhere.
She plays a lot of like preteen and young boys and that kind of stuff. But yeah, Pamela Adlon, if you actually look up her voiceography, she probably done loads of things you recognize. Louis C.K. obviously stopped being involved, and the show continued without him and improved without him. So like no worries there. You can kind of watch it. Like I mean, this is one of the very specific situations where the continued watching of this is important because you're actually supporting the extensive amount of women who made this show and who had massive parts in it, who talk about what it is to grow up as a woman or non-binary at points or gay, and it is basically just about this main character, Sam Fox. It's quite autobiographical in the sense that she is a voice actor and an actor and a director by the end of it, similar to how she ends up directing Better Things, and her relationship with her 3 children and her mother, and it is singularly touching, funny, bizarre, playful, and genuinely unique. Yeah, it's highly subjective, I think, as a text in a positive way. Like it's very much portraying a perspective, and it really captures something I think about family dynamics that are like not high stakes, but how things, a given situation can feel like the most important thing that's happening between parents and children, or a mother and a dog, or siblings, or whatever. And then I find really fascinating that it really conveys that sense that 3 months later it can be like, that wasn't important, but it was incredibly important to you at the time. And I would say it's also a foundational text on the syllabus. Brian, if you want to understand you, I think you need to watch this show. I put it I think number 11 in my top 10 favorite TV shows of all time, or maybe higher actually even. But I love it so much. It's now complete. I found the finale a little underwhelming compared to other finales for this season finales for this show. Season 4 has, I think, one of the most beautiful scenes in television of all time to conclude the season, which is Sam, her friend, and her mother swimming in a neighbour's pool to Night Swimming by R.E.M., which is, in my opinion, a very beautiful song. I think R.E.M., like, apart from anything else, like, just hugely, like, people take the piss out of R.E.M. appropriately. They're kind of funny, but also some of the greatest albums of all time. Anyway, but at the same time, the season finale was touching. The whole season was wonderful. It's a great TV show. I can't recommend it highly enough. Yeah, it was an incredible experience to watch, and it's just, again, it's really not that long per episode. It is funny, but it's incredibly gripping while you watch it. Like, it's a comfortable place to spend some time. I totally agree. Yeah, the first season's maybe a little slow to start, but that's it. We also watched the first episode of season 1 of Strange New Worlds, which is the new Star Trek show starring Anson Mount as Daddy. More like Anson Mount me, Daddy. Captain Pike of the Star Trek, the original series pilot, and also he was the guy in the box pressing the beeping thing like in the episode of Futurama. Yeah, exactly. Those are kind of important touch points. So yes, the new Star Trek series, obviously on that shit straight away. I think it's the 11th Star Trek series, of which like 6 of them have been in the last like 2 years. But yeah, so essentially the very first pilot episode of Star Trek in the 1960s was with a character called Captain Pike, who was in that single pilot. It was shipped to the network. They didn't sell it. They said it was too cerebral, so they took the incredibly unusual decision of paying for a second pilot, which was with Kirk and the traditional crew. So the original pilot is actually set about 10 years in universe before the Kirk episodes. So in Star Trek Discovery, which is a recent Star Trek series, they took this character from the pilot, Captain Pike, who we don't really know much about, and there's always the implication of like the lost adventures of the Enterprise, and put him into the show played by Anson Mount, and they recast Spock and a couple other characters, and were so incredibly popular in that season and so charming and so compelling as characters that there was like, oh, fans are saying to Paramount, you should absolutely commission a series based on these adventures, which is the kind of thing people say all the time, and then they did, essentially, which is what Strange New Worlds is. The episodes in between really the pilot episode and the original Kirk episodes, and as you say, in the original Kirk episodes, Pike does return once as a character after he's been in a terrible accident, essentially. So it's kind of defining the space between that. I thought the first episode was incredibly promising and charming, and I felt very emotional watching it, to be honest. It was really recapturing something very playful and very childlike and very adventurous, and in terms of the plot, it's relatively straightforward. It's meant to be like the week-to-week adventures of the original Enterprise, but the tone of it was so accomplished. I thought it was so in the spirit of taking what people originally liked of Star Trek and actually genuinely modernizing it rather than putting a spin on it. And I think Star Trek can occasionally feel like a bit of a wooden storytelling space, and I think it did a good job of trying to communicate what would people actually be like in this scenario, human-like people. How would they actually interact? And most fundamentally, like the values of Star Trek are about that. Always believing in better and thinking that if we are not there currently, we can be, and working towards that. And I thought that really came through strongly in the episode. And there's some absolutely, it's like spoiler, but it was really provocative. I thought that so in Star Trek there's been a long internal history that there is a World War III around the 90s, early 2000s, following the reunification of Ireland, World War III, eugenics wars, etc. So that's always been part of the history. But in this episode, which is probably produced now, there's a scene where Captain Pike contextualizes it that one of the major events that led to that was the Second American Civil War, and using footage of the real life January 6th insurrection riots.
I think it's also worth noting at the same time that Picard season 2 is now finished, I think, as of last night, right? Yeah. And we're maybe 2 episodes behind. I haven't been loving it. So if you're kind of like Star Trek ambivalent the same way that I am, like maybe season 2 is Picard is one to kind of like meh your way through. But I hugely enjoyed Strange New Worlds, the pilot, and I'm excited to watch more.
Yeah, absolutely. And something which people sometimes talk about, which I can't really relate to, is that Star Trek's so big and where to jump onto it, because I have seen all of it. But I actually think this might be a great place to start if you've always wanted to like maybe watch it with Star Trek but don't know where to jump on, or want something that's accessible. I think this is it. I'm really excited to see where it goes. And yeah, it just made me happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing we're going to talk about is we watched a movie last week called Phantom of the Paradise, which is a Brian De Palma movie from 1974. It's bizarre. It's clearly influenced by Phantom of the Opera. The reason that I got onto it was because it was actually it was in the background of a scene in Better Things, and I was like, what the fuck is that? And I was like, that looks like Griffin's helmet from Berserk. So I looked it up, and Miura, who wrote Berserk, has suggested that has said specifically he was not influenced by this, which I find shocking. It is a 1-for-1 direct
visual
copy.
Absolutely.
It was a really bizarre fever dream of a man who gets his face disfigured and falls in love with a woman and wants to put her show on. It's a mashup specifically of Phantom of the Opera, Faust, and the Picture of Dorian Gray, mashed together in a 70s kind of psychedelic, fever dream. Yeah. Brian De Palma, who also directed most famously Carrie, but also directed Mission Impossible, which is why Mission Impossible is 1994, which is why that movie is that bit weird, because it isn't a straightforward action movie. It's quite like, you get the weird like action scenes towards the end, but the beginning is quite like dark and weird, and it's why I quite like Mission Impossible. However, Joel was just saying to me that Brian De Palma, apparently not a nice man, was quite awful to the women on set of Carrie. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm not a big expert in Brian De Palma, but my general understanding is that like another male director who falls into the fallacy of the auteur who gets to be terrible to people because they're very capable at their craft.
Speaking of, did you hear about Cary Fukunaga?
Oh, I did actually. Yeah.
Who major part in True Detective seasons like 1 through 3. Specifically directed, most recently directed No Time to Die, the Bond movie, Beasts of No Nation, and he created Maniac, that movie. But like kind of seen as a very, very promising. I was going to say young. He's his age is not on his Wikipedia page, but like he's been. Yeah, he directed a movie in 2004, so he was. We
know men get to be young men still learning until their 50s,
especially directors. But he's been accused of sexual harassment by a bunch of women, and specifically of like grooming women. Which just like I don't think men should be allowed to direct. I don't think. Well, I was gonna say I don't think
direct.
I don't think I was gonna say straight men shouldn't be allowed to direct movies anymore. But like Brian, what's his name?
Singer.
Bryan Singer's out there, the worst of them, and he's a gay, unfortunately. I don't think men should be allowed to direct like movies anymore.
I think they've had their turn. I think it's like leaving a field to go fallow. It needs a rest for a while, and then they can come back refreshed.
100%. Anyway, so Phantom of the Paradise, bizarre experience, hugely like say put it on, especially if you're high or something like which we weren't obviously,
of course.
But we actually weren't. That makes it sound like we were. Especially if you're high and like you're looking to put on something bizarre and might give you nightmares. It's a visual feast. It was a lot of fun, and we bought on Blu-ray right afterwards.
Yeah. So speaking of things that are a lot of fun, we start in with our Buffy rankings.
Yeah, let's. Okay.
So up first we have season 7, episode 17. Lies My Parents Told Me, and this is at number 31 in our rankings.
Yeah. So Joel initially rated this 9.4 implied modems out of 10.
And Brian rated this 9.1 effeminate frags.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that means.
There's presumably a frag in it that's effeminate.
Yeah, okay. Oh, you know what it is? It is Andrew gets a phone call from Angel from the Fang Gang, and he's like, an effeminate Fred called, and he seems like intrigued by this like effeminate boy.
Yes, someone called Fred called. They were very effeminate. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So this episode is the episode where you kind of get a slowdown of the pace towards the end of season 7, where you have a focus on Robin, on Giles, on Buffy, and on Spike. You have a lot of flashbacks to Spike. His childhood, his like young adult years with his mother, his then turning into a vampire and turning his mother, and his mother being disgusting and sexual towards him. That's this episode. You have him being triggered by everything, like by the first trigger in him, and Giles and Robin decide to collaborate and kill Spike.
Yeah, and specifically we have Giles going behind Buffy's back to do so. So I think this is maybe a slightly unusual one to have felt strongly about, but I think what we really enjoy about it or really value at this point in the arc of season 7, as you said, was that season 7 was fairly cluttered with things by this point. This is a classic Buffy episode focusing on a character study of these 4 people, so very much Spike and Robin in conflict, and with that the relationships with Giles and Buffy as well. And
you get plenty of Nikki Wood content as well in this episode, which I for one love.
Yeah, we get another perspective on Nikki Wood. We have a very intense confrontation between Robin and Spike in a room that Robin has beset entirely with crucifixes, and yeah, a weird turnabout on 2 things. One is that I think it strengthens the Spike character, because I think Spike and James Marsters continue to get pretty strong character scenes and perspectives straight throughout the show, and this is no exception. I think the flashback stuff with Spike and his mother, or with William and his mother, is really fascinating for characterizing how he is slightly different as a vampire. Like, even when he is a vampire, he still wants love from her and wants something approaching a real emotion, where she is fully avoiding a demon. Yeah. And with Robin, who initially portrays this like strong exterior in the show as a character, I think this portrays him as really, like, pathetic is not the word I'm looking for, but really fragile. So yeah, it adds a lot to the actual I think character arcs, and by doing it here, it means that there's kind of runway to just have that inform the last third of the season.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a very strong episode. I think it's well written. I think it is besmirched by being in season 7 in lots of ways, but I do like it. And like, in some ways, I was looking at this and I was like, oh, how we maybe overrated this. But I think ultimately it is very good, and it's very interesting and well made.
And I think if you were picking out kind of a watching guide for understanding character arcs, I think this is actually an important one from season 7 you have to include. 100%.
And like, sometimes like context is important in terms of like, like one of the reasons we really didn't like the episode that came after the body with Dawn bringing the body, the Joyce back momentarily or whatever, was because it felt like such a weird squib after the body, like context is important. Okay, next up at number 30 we have Storyteller, which is season 7 episode 16, and Joel initially rated this 9.4 salty seals out of 10,
and Brian rated it 9.1 marching band rules.
Yeah, nice. So this is one of my one of the things that I like about Buffy is when they, as I said extensively, is when they do format breaking episodes. I think they do a really good job of it. This is a format breaking episode in its at its core, very much so, where Andrew essentially is making a videotape to communicate forward through time to a future they presume will not happen, where he's making a video explaining what the Scoobies are doing, and also what the Potentials are doing in the run up to the big fight with the big evil. It's a weird episode. It's very good. It's very funny.
Yeah.
And it's full of genuinely touching moments. Yeah.
It's in many ways a classic Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode.
Yeah.
It is. it's an intriguing premise. It gives everyone opportunities to kind of shine in terms of their characters. I'm still like not 100% how I feel about Andrew as a character overall. I feel like I need to sit with that for longer, but I think Tom Lenk does great with him.
Yes.
And this is obviously an episode that really adds a lot of meat to the bone of like what the Andrew character is. But it's a classic Buffy episode in the sense that it really does deliver a lot of different angles and comedy, but also when it does land seriously at the end, that doesn't feel like a sudden tone shift. It's like, no, the seriousness is always here, but the way these characters deal with it is through a certain amount of humor, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it adds to again, in some seasons you will almost have a lot of this stuff spread out more evenly across the season. I think what season 7 does is have really investing episodes, and this is the one that really invests you in the potentials and invests you in the danger they're definitely facing and the likelihood that they will almost definitely all die.
Yeah, and the conclusion of the episode where Andrew kind of like very sadly says like, you know, I don't think I'm going to make it. It's touching and it's weird. It's at its core, it is the best. Like, I think Andrew is a nearly impossible character to sell. He is someone who we were taught to really dislike. In season 6, I think there's a touch of homophobia to the way that we were kind of communicated to dislike him. Because I think some of the things that he does that are just that are communicated as being unlikable are just being gay, realistically. But ultimately, it is a season. It's an episode. This episode really does sell the character as both funny, a satire of a certain kind of person, and then also a genuine person at their core.
Yeah, and it's funny that Andrew the character is so often paired with Spike because they are put through similar crucibles where they like, he's not a redeemable character at all until the point where they get like he is, and then they have to really rebuild his character essentially from there.
Yeah. I think that's kind of like, I think that's the whole thing. It's very good. It's hard to besmirch at all. And
it's very like naughties. Like with the camcorder and all that, like it's tone of it, I think takes it in a way which is quite charming.
Mm-hmm. No, I think so too. And I think any time that Buffy takes a moment as a show takes a moment to say, I'm going to try to do something else. Mm-hmm. It's so charming. It's a great time. Next up at number 29, we have Helpless, season 3, episode 12. And Joel initially rated this 9.4 outrageously long spoons out of 10.
And Brian rated it 8.4 scissors.
Yeah. So Joel, you're this episode's advocate. You go for it.
Yeah, this is such an interesting process because I gave this the same rating as Lies My Parents Told Me, and I feel so completely differently about this episode. Mm-hmm. Helpless is one of my favorite Buffy episodes, just personally and rationally. This is the episode where Buffy is subjected by Giles and the Watchers Council to the Cruciamentum because she's turned 18 and she's put in an abandoned house with a vampire who was a serial killer and has to fight her way out with just her non-slayer prowess and skills. There's a lot of things I like about this episode. I think that from on a more basic level, I think it's a very comprehensible premise. It's a straightforward adventure. You know what's happening. You know what the risks are. That's the best for TV viewing, for Monster of the Week type stuff. I think that it is a genuinely scary episode.
Yes.
I think it's one of the
closest. I would say it's the only episode of Buffy that resembles a slasher.
Yes, 100%. It's one of the most traditional horror episodes, and I think by convincing us and giving us really strong reasons to understand why Buffy is actually so much more vulnerable here, I think it really brings the viewer in to share that perspective with her. There's the whole stuff with Joyce is being kidnapped as well, and the Polaroids of her. The guy whose name escapes me but who plays Krulik, I want to say, the serial killer, is quite terrifying as well, and the way they have him hang while electric up and all that kind of stuff.
Additionally, this episode also has Buffy's father is supposed to, I think, is she supposed to go see him and he cancels or something, but like she's really dealing with the fact that her father has like abandoned her, which is all pretty intense. And the episode ends really wonderfully in a sense, like Buffy like succeeds without her Slayer strength because she is Buffy. And additionally, you have Giles who has decided to go help her. You have Giles who's decided to go help her even though the council won't let him, and he gets fired by the council. Because he's too close to her, and he's totally fine with that because they're like, you're too close to her. She sees you as a father, and he's like, I'm fine with that actually.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think on additional levels, like from a lore perspective, it adds so much. It really not only adds some understanding to the Watchers Council. I think this might be the episode that introduces Quentin Travers.
Oh yeah, I believe it.
He's definitely in it anyway. But it also whatever about the names and dates of the council, this is the episode that tells you what the Watchers Council actually is.
Yeah.
It's an organization that when a Slayer turns 18, they have a long-standing venerable tradition of torturing them, so that they don't
so they're reminded that they are that the council is in control.
And it's a foundational, essential episode in the relationship between Giles and Buffy that becomes strained here, and really, I think, informs Giles' journey as a man who is party to all the terrible things that men do, kind of, hereditarily and personally, and he has to decide to be better than that. And for whatever reason, the relationship between Joyce and Buffy in it as well, and Joyce showing the same strength that Buffy has as a Summers woman, I think it's so important to show that Buffy has this strength independent of any mystical imbuement.
Yep.
But for whatever reason, whenever I think of a pun from Buffy, which has many actual puns, the one that always comes to mind is at the end of this, where she kills Krulik with the holy water she makes him drink. Kralik, sorry. And she says, if I was at full Slayer strength, I'd be punning right now.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things we talked about a lot at the time was, like, Buffy's speech and her loss of speech when she has lost her powers, and the fact that she regains it before regaining her power is because she realizes that her Slayer strength is not her greatest weapon. It's her being Buffy and just a hero, realistically.
Yeah.
And that's really related to how they communicate.
Yeah, if this is an episode that if I was just flicking through to put on, I would put on this episode.
Yeah, I would love that. It's really good. I really like it as well. I'm definitely with a bit of like distance. I think there are some odd misogynistic elements to it, I would say. But I think overall it's an exciting episode. It's very cool. It's very evocative. It's a cool premise. It complicates and deepens the relationship between Buffy and Giles, which is maybe my favorite relationship in this show. And it's a good time.
And one of the weird trivia bits with this episode is that it's one of the very, very rare times in the whole Slayerverse that we actually see a full siring. Because usually if you think of someone being sired, you see them getting bitten and then like it skips forward, or you see them coming out of the ground, etc. But in this Kralik sires one of the Watchers Council helpers and like adopts him as a minion. So it's just weird in that respect as well. 'Cause a lot of their weird little interesting bits to us. So yeah, helpless, big fan of it.
Okay, great. So next up at number 28 we have Tabula Rasa, which is season 6 episode 8, and Joel initially rated this 9.4 Randy bow ties out of 10,
and Brian rated it 6.2 horny Gileses.
Yeah. So this episode is the episode that comes right after Once More Feeling, right?
Yeah, so this episode takes place, this is one immediately after Once More Feeling. It's before the whole smashed Willow addiction arc. And yeah, it's precipitated by, it's kind of a classic farce episode where they all lose their memories of who they are because Willow wants to help Buffy forget her wonderful life in heaven, and that backfires and they all lose their memories essentially.
Cool. Yeah. So obviously this is an episode where Willow has deeply fucked up. It immediately follows Once More Feeling, where she makes Tara forget that they had argued, which over Willow's overuse of magic, which is obviously, or sorry, no, it actually happens in the episode before Once More Feeling, and then Once More Feeling is Tara like
realizing that she's done this.
Yeah, she finds the flower at the end. And this is the episode where Willow and Tara eventually break up.
Yeah, and also the episode where Giles leaves Sunnydale.
It is the episode where Giles leaves Sunnydale. Yep. So this episode I think is it's a really odd one in season 6, and it's very, very good. It's very funny. The premise of it, of all the characters forgetting who they are and trying to piece back together who they are on the basis of what their clothing kind of indicates and all this stuff is genuinely good. It communicates a lot to us about the characters, where like in a kind of like if only I had a good phrase for this, in this kind of like blank slate that they're in, they manage to kind of find more truth out about themselves than they do as an actual people. Like, I think, is it that Anya and Xander don't really have any connection? Yeah,
so I think, if I remember correctly, Wiles and Jillo is what I was going to say. Willow and Tara are naturally drawn to each other, but Anya and Xander don't assume they're in a relationship at all. I think Anya, she's with Spike, but
Buffy kind of takes a like a leadership role regardless, because Buffy is a leader at heart.
Spike assumes he's Giles' son because they're both English.
Exactly, which tells us a lot about the characters.
Yeah, but and obviously because of the premise, it's a great opportunity for comedy, and we explore and to explore the farce of who the characters are in contrast with what they don't know about themselves and what isn't obvious, while obviously leading to it's quite a quirk of Buffy in that you often have mystically induced scenarios that leave people with almost like the morning after fear. Because then they come out of this like, oh no, who are we now? What have we done? That happens a lot to these characters, yeah.
Yep.
And then obviously having to contend with trying to like be Scoobies when they don't understand like what monsters are or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think they don't know that Spike is a vampire.
Yeah,
and that's the revelation as well.
It is, yeah.
Randy Giles.
Well, yeah, because his name, he decides his name is Randy because it says this on his coat.
Yeah.
So I think there's like, I mean, for one thing, the loan shark pun in this episode is excellent.
Yes,
love that.
The loan shark who is actually a shark.
Exactly.
Very good.
I think as well, there's like, I think Buffy and naming generally throughout the text, and also just specifically for Buffy herself, going through names from Buffy to Anne to in this episode Joan, all very fascinating. Joan in this episode really conjuring Joan of Arc, but also like very close to kind of like your Jane Doe kind of like blank person kind of thing, but and in that way, Buffy underestimating how brilliant she is, and it's very fascinating. Yeah,
kind of her default being that she wants to be almost the average person in the situation, I think comes through as well.
Absolutely. And then at the end of the episode, you have Giles and Anya kissing, and and Willow and Tara having a moment as well, and it's like that's tells you like a decent amount about the characters, and the ending of the episode is heartbreaking. You have Willow weeping her little heart out as Tara packs her stuff up and leaves the house.
Doing a classic Willow big ugly cry.
Literally big ugly cry. And then you have Giles leaving the country, and Buffy and Spike ending up kissing in the bronze. It's a fascinating, bizarre episode. It's so much better, so much lighter than has happened already in the season, which has been all about Buffy wanting to be back in heaven ultimately, and not really knowing what her place is, and it's really good, and I think it's the last great episode of season 6. Is that right?
Well, there's still some of the villains we liked as well, and there's some other interesting stuff, but it's definitely one of the it's a change in tone after this. I think we kind of very much go downhill in terms of the darkness from here out.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? We have Normal again higher than this. So you obviously, at the very least, think that that's the last great episode of season 6.
Yeah, I really enjoy Normal again.
It's really good. Next up at number 27, we have What's My Line Part 2, Season 2, Episode 10. And Joan initially rated this 9.8 incense handbags out of 10.
And Brian rated it 8.8 E-flat diminished ninths.
Yes, this is the second Kendra episode. It's great. I love this part of Buffy. I love season 2 of Buffy so much. I think it's wonderful. In this episode, you have
Kendra arrives at the end and says she's Kendra the Vampire Slayer. The second part is her finding out how can there be a second Vampire Slayer. She's a better Slayer than that Giles wants compared to Buffy. Angel is being tortured by Drusilla. There's a whole kind of Drusilla Spike thing going on. This is when the third assassin attacks her, the police officer. There's the whole stuff about the placement tests, about what kind of, should they be geniuses or whatever.
Yeah, okay, great. I think we're all good there. So generally in this episode you have Kendra having arrived, Buffy and her, they don't actually, I think, initially even duke it out, do they? I think they just kind of talk. I think they duked it out at the end of the last episode.
Mm-hmm.
And you have kind of Kendra kind of becoming a temporary Scoob. So you have her talking to Giles and her exhibiting that she has actually read all the books that he was supposed to make Buffy read, but Buffy refused to. He
didn't even bother giving her the handbook because he knew she wouldn't read it, basically.
Yeah, which is very funny. I think she really fits into everything in the sense that like you have Buffy, who in the last episode really felt like she had no options in life to explore what her future might be, and Kendra represents a person who's much more limited in her options, and Buffy realizes that what she can do in this episode is to give Kendra more options, essentially. And Kendra goes from a very unusual character at the beginning of the episode to a very likable, very innocent but genuine person who doesn't deserve the way that she's treated in the show. But ultimately, you it's a lovely interaction between Buffy and Kendra, and it sets the stage for Faith, which I think is very important. Additionally, you have tons of great plot related stuff in the episode. You have basically the end of the Spike Drusilla thing, where Spike was trying to restore Drusilla to power, right? And at the end of the episode ends up because she had been attacked in Czech Republic, I think, maybe, I can't remember. So actually, the Czech Republic didn't exist at that point, so probably not. But
Poland, I think, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. So, and then at the end of the episode, you have Drusilla in that classic shot walking out of the church with Spike, who has had rubble fallen on him because Buffy attacked him, and her at full power, and it's kind of like really spooky, scary kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a really strong episode as well. I think it's a really classic episode of Buffy. I think that one of the most memorable things with Buffy as a show, when people remember the early seasons, is like there's two Slayers, and it's one of the only twists like this I think I've ever seen that didn't feel cheap. Yeah. It's like, no, it's like that concept that when Buffy died momentarily, it split the line, is so memorable to me and so essential to the understanding of what the Slayers are, and that they found a way to have Buffy interact with another Slayer when there's only one of them. I thought it was really cool at the time. I think Kendra is an incredibly charming character, and the way that she, is something very, very, very provocative in the character, because the whole point of the Slayer line is to stop them from talking to each other. So every scene where they're discussing their respective experiences is transgressive, in the story. I think she is magnetic in her interactions with the Scoobies. I think it gives us a great opportunity to discuss why is Buffy in a relationship with a vampire, and how this whole fucking clusterfuck of a situation has developed. I always forget that Spike and Drusilla were such a major antagonistic kind of thing going on for a while, and that we have this very specific so Drusilla is trying to be restored by draining, or they need the blood of her sire. That's why Angela is being tortured and is involved there. And this reversal of power at the end, because Drusilla has been portrayed as this loon for so long, and then Spike is crippled by this church collapsing, and then Drusilla is this powerful restored figure who is implied to be, as Spike's direct sire, perhaps much more terrifying than he is, really. Yeah. And there's the whole school piece of business around the placement tests, and whether Willow and Oz should be recruited by the FBI or NASA or something, and Buffy was meant to be a police officer, and all this sort of stuff. That's really interesting as well.
Yeah, and then at the end of the episode, you have Kendra telling Buffy that she sees, that Buffy sees being a Slayer as a job, but in actuality, it's part of who she is. Yeah, which is an important aspect of what this means, because Buffy and Slayerhood and maturity and adulthood and communal kind of efforts it's all intertwined.
If you put on Walks My Line Part 2 right now, you have a lot of fun watching it. That's one of the most important
undoubtedly
things,
And what I'd say as well is that I definitely underrated the episode at the time, because I was very, very caught up with the racial elements of it. And it is in one way it's kind of like, this is one of the only episodes of Buffy with a significant black character a significant black woman getting featured in any significant way, which is fucking bonkers. And we know that she's going to be killed just for plot reasons, with no real ceremony, no real grief over her. But at the same time, that should be a criticism of every episode of Buffy, as opposed to the one that actually highlights it through inclusion.
Exactly.
In lots of ways. But I have a lot of fun in this episode. I would watch it again in a heartbeat, and I would have a ton of fun. Okay, next up at number 26, it is finally Angel, season 1, episode 7. So Joel initially rated this 9.4 crucifixes out of 10.
And Brian rated it 8.7 unread diaries. I have a note here, Brian, that you re-rated it. What does that mean?
Oh, just that when we were talking about it, I think I initially rated it like an 8.2 or something, and I said, you know what, you've actually convinced me. I'm going to rate it higher. So I'm not sure if the real Buffy, what was it, Super Fangs, will
respect the errata there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, no, respect my re-rating. Maybe they think that the original rating is canon.
Yeah. Maybe the original rating arrived on a boat we're playing. So yeah, it's Angel.
What more do you need to say?
Yeah. Okay. Next episode. So this is the episode that launched 1,000 ships. Do you know what I mean? Because this is you have obviously the great chemistry between Buffy and Angel in these initial episodes. It's impossible to remember, given how much of a fucking comic, how much of a clown Angel is now in Angel the show. But like at this point, he was incredibly mysterious, incredibly romantic and compelling and interesting, and it's impossible to know if anyone would have seen this twist coming. But the revelation that he is that the boy that Buffy has fallen in love with as a vampire slayer is a vampire, and is directly tied to the Master, and it's just it's so simple and so effective.
Absolutely. No, I think it's wonderful. What I say about the episode is that it doesn't just have like a great premise and great content, in the sense that what happens in the episode is that Buffy finds out that he's a vampire because they have to stay in her house. I can't remember what moment it is that he vamps out. Is it that anyway? But it's an episode with like a lot of really dramatic, really effective mood lighting. I think Buffy introduces Angel to Joyce in this episode. Apart from that, you have Darla, who gets killed in this episode, which is crazy that Darla gets killed so early in the...
When she pulls out both her eagles and they're blasting away.
Yeah, that's one of the things I say about this episode. I think the combat scene at the end is maybe a little meh, but I mean, if at some point we could like pick our top 10 favorite episode enders from Buffy, this would certainly be up there. Like along with I'm trying to think what other episodes of great endings. Restless has a great ending. The Body has a great ending. Well, The Body would be number one probably, but this episode ends with Buffy and Angel dancing in the bronze, and Angel flinching, and at the end when Buffy walks away, he has a crucifix marked into his chest from where they were dancing too close together. It is one of the most beautiful, poetic images of the show. It's perfect. It's perfection. That image, 10 out of 10, no criticisms.
And he vamps out when they are kind of, she's like, who are you? Why can't we be together? And he's like, I'm older than you, etc. They're in her bedroom and they kiss, and he pulls away and kind of vamps out, and we see that kind of effect for the first time. And then she screams, he disappears through the window. Joyce comes up and says, what happened? She's like, nothing, I just saw a shadow. And we get all the exposition in this episode for the first time about him being this kind of tragic figure cursed with a soul, who was this terrible monster called Angelus, but he was cursed by the Calgar clan, etc. It's just so gothic, it's deeply gothic. And it's so high octane, potent storytelling that it sustained like people still caring about Buffy and Angel 20 years later, 25 years later.
Nearly 30 years later. Jesus. It's really great. I love this episode a lot. And yeah, I'm very happy with where we've rated it. I have no reservations about rating it this high and not lower. Okay, next up at number 25, we have This Year's Girl, season 4, episode 15, and Joel initially rated this 9 out of place crew members out of 10.
And Brian rated it 9 tunnels and cigars.
Yeah, cool. So this is the episode, the two-parter episode where Faith returns in season 4. Buffy and gang are in college. Buffy has started a relationship with Riley, and Faith has eventually woken up from her coma. What she does is she goes on the rampage, then comes to UC Sunnydale to fight, to basically, she is deeply traumatized. She fights Buffy. She tries to find out what happened to the Master, and she's dead set on getting her revenge. She finds a contraption left behind by the mayor, and she uses it on Buffy in a fight in Buffy's home.
Did you say the Master a second ago?
I did say the Master, I meant the mayor.
Yeah.
Where she she swaps bodies with Buffy. It is. I was the one advocating for this to be so high up. I think this two-parter, especially the second part, is an unsung masterpiece in this show.
And this year's girl is the episode in this duology where Faith and Buffy share the dream, where Faith says there's so much to do for little sis Gex here. Faith has a dream where she is, dressed much more conservatively or carefree at a picnic. Buffy turns up looking like the Wishverse Buffy and like sticks a knife into her. There's just such a shock of having Faith come back in this episode, and the real sense of danger that it implies. But it also, I feel there's kind of a real sense in the episode of the gang's decisions coming back to haunt them to a certain degree, because you almost want to have, or like the narrative almost wants Faith to be stabbed and kind of out of the picture, and this is very much about I was one of you and you stabbed me.
Yep.
And that of course Faith made a lot of poor decisions in season 3, but should they have done more for her to like not be in a position where the mayor could take advantage of her? It's very debatable, I think.
Absolutely. And this sets up the next episode, which I absolutely hugely adore. What we get at the end of the episode as well, like, is Faith having taken Joyce hostage and having swapped Buffy, like, bodies with Buffy. One of the absolute best, like, it's such a great, like, speaking of great endings to episodes, you have Faith responding to, or looking in the mirror and saying, sorry, you have Faith in Buffy's body looking in the mirror and saying 5 by 5, and that's how the audience finds out that that's what she has done. She's swapped bodies with Buffy, and it's incredible. It's wonderful. It's brilliant. I love it. I love any episode with a good dream sequence. I think this is one of the last ones, really, and this is just really good.
Yeah, before Restless, obviously.
Well, obviously, yeah. I really like this episode. I'm hugely advocating for it. I like it a lot. Okay, next up at number 24, we have Band Candy, Season 3, Episode 6. John Lucia rated this 9 defiled police car bonnets out of 10.
And Brian rated it 9 geek machines out of 10.
Yeah, what's to be said about Band Candy?
What's Band Candy about? What happens in that?
Band Candy is where, actually I can't remember what the initial premise is. Is that
it's Ethan Rain again.
Ethan Rain, of course
comes
it is.
Down, he's distributing cursed chocolate, basically. I think it's is it for some kind of
for the band.
Drive. But I'm wondering how he manages to get the chocolate to them. But anyway, the premise is obviously that the chocolate causes them to revert to their teenage selves. So we have the chaos caused by that, but we also have specific essential character moments and development for Giles, for Joyce, and for Principal Snyder, who shouldn't be underestimated in this episode either. I think he's
certainly as a character and as a performance, 100%. Yeah. So what happens is that Principal Snyder is giving everyone this candy to hand out to sell, and forcing them all to sell it for the band. It's Mr. Trick in conjunction with Mr. Rain doing all this, so it is part of the mayor's approach, which is great. And eventually what happens is that the candy is making everyone act like immature teenagers. So you have Joyce and Giles and Snyder, most importantly.
Giles and his Ripper's personality.
Exactly. It is hugely funny. It's incredibly good fun. It might be my favourite Jane Espenson episode, I would say.
So I think... ultimately, like, Joyce and Giles, two of the greatest characters on the show, two of the ones that I think are often maybe underestimated in a show that is focused on its teenage cast for obvious reasons, but add a huge amount to it. I think we learn a lot about Giles in this episode. I think it's really engaging to see him with this rebellious personality. He was still very capable of and wanting to help ultimately. And I think there's no episode we'll talk about on this entire list that will really be like, this is our favourite Snyder episode. But Armin Shimmerman as Principal Snyder is a really important part of these early three seasons.
Yes.
And
a really bizarre, the fact that Flutie gets replaced so early on was such a weird decision.
Yeah.
And I think it already works.
Yeah, well, I think we obviously discussed that at the time, but the plan was for the principal to be regularly killed and replaced.
Yeah, and then Armin Shimmerman was too good.
Yeah, so he's a real supporting player, but can you imagine the high school years without Principal Snyder as an antagonist? Yeah,
what we never noted was whatever episode it is that Giles threatens Snyder. I think we noted that in our rating of that episode that that is what happens, because I don't even remember what episode it is.
It must be the one after Ang.
Yeah, it must be. But anyway, that was, we obviously overlooked that moment. No, it's definitely the best Snyder episode. It's a great episode. It's very funny. You have Giles and Joyce wandering the streets, breaking into shops to get, cool young person fashion. You have them listening to Cream, I think, and just being wonderful, effervescent teenage punks in 40-something-year-old bodies. It is the best. It's maybe the best Christine Sutherland ever looks in the show, and Giles is Ripper, kind of crazy hot. To be honest.
Incredibly hot. And then when Joyce dies later on, and Giles listens to the Cream song again, the Voyages. Tale of Lost Ulysses, I think, or something along those lines. Yeah. But it's a moment that I did not appreciate before when I watched this show, and I found it incredibly affecting this time around. And it's really. There's real mastery, I think, of storytelling in small moments like that. Particularly when you watch shows together. It's an eminently worthwhile episode of Buffy, I think. And
as great episodes of Buffy tend to do, as I've just mentioned twice there, the episode ends with an incredible moment of Buffy saying, "Well, I'm just glad that I stopped you guys when I did," because she finds Joyce and Giles making out on a bonnet of a police car. And basically what she's saying is, "I'm glad I stopped you having sex." And the two of them just look awkwardly, and the episode ends.
Yeah.
Because as we find out later, they absolutely did have sex.
It seems like it might be Dead Man's Party, which is the second episode of season 3 that he...
Oh, which is one of the episodes that we rated most poorly of this whole show.
Yeah, but
it's a bad episode.
That scene could be in any episode.
So true. Yeah. And there are great scenes. There's no episode of Buffy without some great scenes. Oh, maybe Where the Wild Things Are. Yeah. Okay. Next up at number 23, we have Fear Itself, season 4, episode 4. This is the last great Halloween episode, I would say. Joel initially rated this 9.1 heretical lesbian icons.
And Brian rated 8.8 freaks with no faces. So this is the Hurloween episode, like I say, the Halloween episode.
Hurloween.
In the college years. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. Where they go to the college dorm house and they...
Frat house, but yeah.
Frat house, yeah. Frat, dorm frat. And the dormitorians have invoked accidentally a Celtic god of fear, which turns this haunted house into a haunted house of death. There's a tiny part of me, I don't know how to explain this, there's a tiny part of me which still thinks that I don't really know Buffy very well, or I'm not a Buffy fan, as if it's a show I watch casually. I don't know where that's coming from.
Okay.
But there was a point where I definitely only had seen, when I was a kid, only a few episodes of Buffy, and Buffy was something which only the grown-up teenagers I knew were allowed to watch. Now, looking back, I must be thinking about a time when I was 8 or 9. But one of the episodes I knew, and one of the episodes which I had seen and out of context, was Fear itself. And I think that's why, for me, this is probably my favourite Halloween episode, and one of my favourite Monster of the Week episodes, because it's so easy to understand what's happening in the house. From the moment that you see kind of the girl banging on the window, and then the window disappears and traps her in there, and even though you don't see a lot of gore or violence, or in these episodes, there's something you really feel danger. You always feel like a good Buffy episode, like a real person has been murdered.
Yeah, well, this episode, the thing that it's doing is it's bringing all of their deepest fears into being. So you have Willow casting a spell to find everyone else, everyone else they've abandoned her essentially. And her magic spell takes over and basically assaults her. Well, not assaults her. That's a loaded phrase.
Attacks her. Yeah. And she does eventually get overwhelmed by magic. Yeah. So.
You have Oz being overwhelmed and turning into a werewolf and sitting and rocking in a bathtub, which is very upsetting. I can't remember what Buffy's deepest fear is. Do you remember what it was?
It was Anders' deepest fear, which is very accurate, is that people won't listen to him or pay attention to him.
Yeah, no one can see him or talk or hear him anymore.
But to be fair, it's because of that arc that Xander has with the college stuff, where everyone went to college and he didn't, which is actually quite an engaging part of his character.
It's an odd note in the show, and I think it really works. You have so many great things in this episode. It's genuinely funny while being genuinely creepy. So you have incredible moments like Anya turning up dressed as a bunny, because that's the scariest thing she can think of, which definitely an overdone joke in Buffy as a whole, but this first introduction to it is genuinely funny and genuinely charming. And you have Giles coming at the house with a fucking chainsaw. Wonderful. And then at the end of the episode where the demon actually comes forth and it's a big fanfare and it turns out to be tiny. Incredible. And again, the conclusion of the episode, the last scene where they're all sitting in Giles' apartment and Giles is like, oh God. And they're like, what? Is it something awful? And he says, look at the text below the image in this book for this demon. And they're like, what does it say? And he says, actual size. Was that what it is? It's like...
Yeah, it's basically, it's literally actual size. And it's like a couple of inches tall. Yeah.
And then it's a couple of moments of quiet and then...
Yeah. Giles was some of the underrated kind of comic drops in the show. And yeah, I think Buffy's basic fear is that she's not able to save people. I think she's confronted by various people who, like, she hasn't been able to help and stuff like that. Yeah. So yeah, again, like, what more can you say? It's a scary episode which uses a fantasy premise to explore in a meaningful way people's fears and people's characters. And I think lesser shows, is how we go put it here, or more cynical shows do, like, just use it as an opportunity to say, oh, he's scared of spiders, so have a big spider. Do you know what I mean? But like in this, like, the fears mean something. Yeah,
what I'd say is this episode is kind of like a rerun at Nightmares, and it does a much better job of it. It's really, really good. And then last for this episode, at number 22, we have Prophecy Girl, season 1, episode 12. And Joel initially rated this 10 chest compressions out of 10.
And Brian rated it 8.2 5.1s out of 10. I fucking hate you sometimes.
What was the 5.1 out of 10?
No idea,
yeah.
But like...
I know, yeah. I took every opportunity I could to do that. I was wrong with this rating. This episode is... This episode is wonderful. It is the premise of Buffy, what Buffy's about, what Buffy becomes, everything is in this episode. It's so good. It is strong. It is well acted. It is evocative. I love it.
Yeah. So season finale of the first season, a truncated season. The episode, which in some ways has to contribute to whether the show gets renewed or whether people keep watching it. Yeah. It has to pay off on what they set up throughout the season. It is a more limited episode. It's more limited season than maybe what we see later on. And I generally award 10 for an episode that is not without its flaws, but which is perfect, you know. And this is Buffy. This is a Buffy episode. She confronts the Master. She dies. The prophecy is fulfilled.
She is deeply afraid. This is the episode where she says, like, you know, I'm 16 years old. I don't want to die.
Yeah. Yeah. And she dies, Xander, in... his one good act that he trades on for the next 6 seasons brings her back. We have an understanding of how, like in that very fact that she confronts her fear, she dies, everything that's traditional, everything that's conservative, everything that's patriarchal about narrative structure, about society says, well, the prophecy is being fulfilled. And so she says, okay, but what if I sidestep this a little bit? You know, I kind of reinterpret it my own way. And then the confrontation with the Master, where he finally starts to, like, realize he has actually encountered something that he can't really understand, and she says that he has, like, looks like he's punch mouth.
I could write an essay on that line by itself. Go on.
Yeah. And then, you know, the whole iconic kind of throwing him through the sunroof, is that what you call that? The skylight. Skylight onto the table. And then even just by itself, the seeing of her walking in her dress
to the Buffy theme
with a leather jacket on for
which I think is probably my favorite outfit of this entire show.
Yeah, and her with a crossbow, Chekhov's crossbow, which never actually works. It's fantastic. It's you know, it's Buffy.
It is. It's absolutely, it encapsulates what is brilliant about Buffy, and I love it a lot. Yeah, I have no notes of negativity about this episode. I obviously was feeling a bit like I don't know, a little bit harsher at the time. Obviously, I had forgotten what a slog season 6 and 7 were going to be.
We were definitely more critical, I think, with the initial few episodes, because you don't want just for everything feel like 10 out of 10. I love Buffy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that is how it feels sometimes watching a Buffy episode.
It does. But that scene where Buffy says, like, Giles, I'm 16 years old. I don't want to die. And her voice is cracking during. I'm getting emotional thinking about it. It is the premise of the show. It's really good. I love Prophecy Girl. Great. Okay, next episode, we're going to rank episodes 21 to 13. So we're getting into our top 20. And then, it's just 2 more episodes to go after that, which is crazy.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Should we talk about the Cordelia chase?
Yes. So on Cordelia chase, we had 2 very linked episodes, which are A Hole in the World and Shells. And these are the Freg-centric / now Illyria-centric episodes of Angel, where in a sentence, Freg is infected by an old one, dies, and Amy Acker is reborn as the old one Illyria, who is the character we stay with for the rest of the season. This was quite a strange pair to watch for me, I think, because having thought about Angel for so long, having read so much of the comics and all that, and about Illyria, the concept that Fred dies in this season and is infested with this old one who takes over the character is so prolific and so important to everything that's said about kind of season 5 of Angel and everything that happens afterwards in the expanded universe and all that. And yet it's an incredibly knotty and complicated situation. The episodes themselves, the main episode, the one in which Fred dies, A Hole in the World, it was a very odd watch because it's often considered to be one of the best episodes of Angel.
Yep.
And it's a difficult one to unpack because it is structured in many ways like a really good episode of television, but you have to believe that they believe what they're doing in the episode. And you have everything. So essentially the premise is that a sarcophagus arrives that is ancient and misunderstood. Fred touches it, becomes infected in something that they have to try and figure out what it is. It becomes very clear that she is dying. She's been hollowed out and liquefied from the inside, and that she's going to be filled up with this horrible monster, this ancient demon. And that they all band together because everyone loves Freg and she's such an important character, and they're going to do everything they can to fight to save her. Everyone gets an emotional speech about how much they love her, how this is one of our Scoobies, essentially, this can't happen. And Fred gets an extended death sequence where she is wasting away in Wesley's arms. They have some moment of happiness together, and then it's taken away really horrifically at the end. And all of that on paper reads really well. Except for me, I find watching this episode, it felt really insincere.
Yeah.
And I hasten, I'm kind of chasing to say that because I do think it's an enjoyable watch. The concept of Illyria, of the concept of this old one being manifested, the way that even Lauren beats Eve for Fred, and everyone's like, this is Fred, we have to do it for her. I love all that on paper, and I think some of the acting is great. I think Amy Acker does great with the dying scenes and losing control of herself and her dying and saying, why don't I get to stay?
Lexis Downs was great in it.
Lexis Downs,
specifically, who's great in it, I think, is Spike in his little speech where he's looking down the hole, because they basically, Angel and Spike go to England to try to find a way to stop it. I don't know, bizarre little sojourn, and there's basically looking at a hole in the world where all the old ones are kept, and it's kind of like an Evergel kind of thing. He's looking down, he's saying, oh, there's somebody over all the way down there probably looking down on us and thinking the same thing as us. And it's a really bizarre, quiet, existentially scary moment.
Yeah.
And it's a great performance. It's maybe my favorite line delivery of the whole thing by Spike Marsters.
James Marsters. Yeah, because essentially what it comes down to is that there is a way to recall the demon back to the Cotswolds where the prison is, but will kill everyone between here and there, and that they have this impossible situation where they can't imagine losing Fred, but they can't put this on her either. And yes, so Spike says, there's, it turns out there's a hole in the world because the prison goes straight through.
Feel like
someone should have told us. We should have known that. So that's all really, really good, except that the issue for me with it is that the episode is set up that she's going to die at the end, and that's what they've chosen to do. So there's something about it that feels really
inevitable,
insincere, inevitable. There's something about giving us all this, we're going to do everything we can to save her, when you specifically designed that for maximum impact when it doesn't happen. That the balance just isn't right for me.
Yeah, I agree.
And yeah, I love the deeper well. And I totally appreciate that Amy Acker stays in the show and plays a different role.
That's the saving grace in terms of the, like, I mean, for me, I think the episode has a deep misogyny. It is the one remaining woman left in this cast.
And she's put in a position where she's like, oh, my boys, my handsome boys are going to save me. Like she says all this as well. Yeah.
And she is wasting away, dying, needing to be saved. It's pretty heartbreaking. It's also like, there's like a deep twinge of misogyny to it. The fact that she gets, like, the fact that, like, you know, what happened there was that writing wise, they wanted to portray a different character for her, where she gets to do something a little bit more interesting. Totally understand that in some ways, but like, I don't know. I'm just like, the way this show treats women is gross. Yeah. Ultimately, and this is a huge example of it. Is that you have this character, you never really did much with her except show her to be a lovely cutesy little girl who is incredibly capable when given some time to shine, but otherwise mostly hangs back, like, you know, and then like killing her for the sake of some men getting to show their emotions, and then like,
yeah, it is all contextualized. Even though we have the framing narrative of Fred and her loss and her parents and all that, it is contextualizing all the men getting opportunity to talk about how valuable she is to them in a way where the balance is just not. You know, you could write that scene in Buffy with a different dialogue, a different emphasis. The facts of it can be the same, but the emphasis here is, you know, how everyone has their individual relationship and they all think she's perfect and they're all in love with her and wonderful. And like, even Angel gets like angry and is like, I lost Cordelia, I can't lose Fred. It's like, you're only mentioning Cordelia in this context because of its relationship to you. It's all a little bit odd. So yeah, I think I'm going to I also think particularly the treatment of Eve in this, where she's like treated as pathetically waiting for Lindsay, this like woman who was meant to be like capable. I don't think it's a great role, but kind of capable, and is suddenly like being smacked about by men standing around her saying, give us their information and all this kind of stuff. It's just, it leaves a sour taste in my mouth, unfortunately. I think there are great performances with really interesting lore in it. I think I still got very upset with her dying in Wesley's arms, and
specifically for me, the final scene where it's just a flashback to her hopefully leaving her parents' house in Texas and driving off to LA. Yeah, that was heartbreaking.
Yeah, unfortunately, some of the heartbreak of the episode comes from if she wanted or needed a different role. If there's a loss, it's because she wasn't written for enough to do. And I only mentioned this briefly, but it did pop up in the production notes, like Joss Whedon talking about this episode and saying, "Oh, it was so emotional. I cried manly tears at like how emotional it was, because obviously men can't just have normal tears." Yeah, all that kind of crap. I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10 failed feminist gestures, which is a difficult rating for me, because I think there's lots about it that I actually like from a story point of view. I like a lot of the performances. There's just a lot about how he actually executed that. I really was disappointed how much I didn't enjoy it to actually watch. So a conflicting 6 out of 10 for me.
Sure, I'm going to give it 8 failed feminist gestures. I didn't have the same expectations going into it as you do, because you have different memories of it. I am deeply disappointed with some of the elements of it. I think it's very effective in other ways. I think it's very well acted. I think it's very well written in individual moments. It doesn't hang all together very well, but I don't think it's quite a 6 out of 10 level for me. I think a weak 8 failed feminist gestures. Yeah,
and I feel like I would absolutely take an argument on that. I feel like I don't know how I feel about this really concretely, you know.
Totally fair.
And then next episode is Shells. It follows on directly from the end of the episode. Illyria becomes summoned into Freg's body. And we have a more straightforward kind of adventure episode where they're trying to figure out, can they still save her? And there's like a lot of legwork done to like make it very clear that despite it being the Buffy universe, know that you can't save her this time. There's a conflict over the fact that it turns out that Gung was involved with accidentally, but you know, with some definitely culpability, waving the sarcophagus through customs, and that infected Illyria, or infected Fred. Wesley is a man on a mission. He shoots Knox, who is we haven't said was revealed as the person who had kind of brought Illyria forth. He stabs Gung when he finds out that Gung had a part in it, and then there's a log of Illyria.
He also shoots it's actually the previous episode that he shoots one of the the Wolfram and Hart workers because they weren't working on Fred's case.
And then the whole premise being that she is, she can bend time, she can effectively almost teleport, she is incredibly strong. I think it conveys the actual threat of Ogun very well. And then she's going to raise her army of darkness, and then it turns out that the army is gone, and she is infected to some degree with Fred's memories, and isn't as strong as she expected to be, coming back as an all-powerful demon. And it ends with...
You also find out, very upsettingly, that Fred's soul has been consumed.
Yeah. So there's no chance of bringing her back. It's like a great pain to make that clear to us. And it ends with Wesley in great danger, confronting her essentially, but trying to either convince her to leave Fred, or at least saying that, if you're going to look like her, I will help you try to acclimatize this world you are now trapped in and have no place in. But you're going to have to change, and kind of setting up this dynamic where he has kind of this reluctant mentorship with her as well. So yeah, I kind of feel like maybe for me, this is a quicker one to summarize because they're very linked episodes. They're very sequential, and it's all very plot driven. But maybe a 7 failed feminist gestures for me.
The same, yeah.
I thought it was a cleaner episode, and once we get over the issues with the actual death, I don't dislike the idea of Illyria, and I think she introduces an interesting dynamic and gives Wesley something very specific to do. I just don't think it should be at the expense of women suffering for no really clear reason. But it's still the idea that she's very similar to Glory as a character, something that is not of this plane, that is we cannot deal with, and how we actually contain it, and that frightens me in a way that I always enjoy.
Yeah, no, I would say it's weaker than like Hole in the World for me, but overall, it was an enjoyable watch certainly, and like clunky in moments, but I do like the Illyria stuff as well. Though I don't like Illyria's character design at all. It's very the leather stuff, that's aged very badly.
It's early noughties, Todd McFarlane comic book kind of heavy metal vibes to it.
Yeah, no, it truly is. I think the scene between Wesley and Illyria at the end, very intriguing, very odd, very impactful. The fact that it is, her soul is consumed. The same way that vampire souls exist out there, it kind of feels like vampires, they die, their soul goes to heaven, and
you never get a sense of the human being damned.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The human is the soul is out there. It can be put back in. Mm-hmm. Whereas this is gone. She is whatever. If there's an eternal being in this universe, which it does seem like there is, Fred has lost that.
Yeah,
that's terrifying.
And it's important, I suppose, to contextualize that they were expecting to have a 6th season. If they did, the plan was to find a way to bring her.
I was reading about this. I couldn't find any indication of that. But I you've said that to me before, but I haven't been able to find
I'll look into that because maybe I've made that up.
We have plenty of time to talk about Illyria, certainly.
Or maybe I read it in the read it in an art book or something like that.
Yeah, sure.
But my understanding is that the intention wasn't for this to be an all-time permanent thing for Fred. But this is what we have. Okay, so I think we will bring it to a conclusion there for this week. Thank you very much for joining us. Very happy to have you with us as we crest towards top 20 Buffy episodes of all time, as objectively and scientifically determined by the Buffy Boys, which is you and me, Brian.
That is me and you.
So we will see you next week. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know. Tell your friends. Tell the
old gods consuming your friends.
That's almost exactly what I was planning to say. Tell the old gods consuming the friends in your life. And we will see you next time right here for Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
See ya.
Bye.